Hello, welcome back. So there's actually some rain outside, so we get double rain. Probably can't hear it though. Alright, let's set up here. So, we are on chapter 55. Let me get some water. So last we left off, Eragon and Saphira had fallen asleep in the dragon hold, and Auric had been essentially, somewhat, his military status had been rescinded, but he was then kind of given into the service of showing Eragon and Saphira around. So, chapter 55, Mandrake Root and Newt's Tongue. The blankets were bunched underneath Eragon when he woke, but he was still warm. Saphira was asleep on her cushion, her breathing coming in steady gusts. For the first time since entering Farthendur, Eragon felt secure and hopeful. He was warm and fed, and had been able to sleep as long as he liked. Tension unknotted inside him, tension that had been accumulating since Brom's death, and even before, since leaving Palancar Valley. I don't have to be afraid anymore. But what about Murtagh? No matter the Varden's hospitality, Eragon could not accept in good conscience, knowing that, intentionally or not, he had led Murtagh to his imprisonment. Somehow the situation had to be resolved. His gaze roamed the caves through the ceiling as he thought of Araya. Chiding himself for daydreaming, he tilted his head and looked out at the dragon hold. A large cat sat on the edge of the cave, licking a paw. It glanced at him, and he saw a flash of slanted red eyes. "Solenbum?" he asked incredulously. "Obviously." The werecat shook its rough mane and yawned languorously, displaying his long fangs. He stretched, then jumped out of the cave, landing with a solid thump on Izadar Mithrim, 20 feet below. "Coming?" Eragon looked at Saphira. She was awake now, watching him motionlessly. "Go, I will be fine," she murmured. Solenbum was waiting for him under the arch that led to the rest of Trojanheim. The moment Eragon's feet touched Izadar Mithrim, the werecat turned and flicked it with a flick of his paws and disappeared through the arch. Eragon chased after him, rubbing the sleep from his face. He stopped through the archway and found himself standing on top of Volturin, the endless staircase. There was nowhere else to go, so he descended to the next level. He stood in an open arcade that curved gently to the left and encircled Trojanheim's central chamber. Between the slender columns supporting the arches, Eragon could see Izadar Mithrim, sparkling brilliantly above him, as well as the city mountain's distant base. The circumference of the central chamber increased with each successive level. The staircase cut through the arcade's floor to an identical level below and descended through scores of arcades until it disappeared in the distance. The sliding trough ran around the outside of the curved stairs. At the top of Volturin was a pile of leather squares to slide on. To Eragon's right, a dusty corridor led to the level's rooms and apartments. Solenbum padded down the hall, flipping his tail. "Wait," said Eragon. He tried to catch up with Solenbum, but glimpsed him only fleetingly in abandoned passageways. Then, as Eragon rounded a corner, he saw the werecat stood before the door and yowl, seemingly of its own accord. The door slid inward. Solenbum slipped inside, then the door shut. Eragon halted in front of it, perplexed. He raised his hand to knock, but before he did, the door opened once more, and warm light spilled out. After a moment's indecision, he stepped inside. He entered an earthy two-room suite, lavishly decorated with carved wood and clinging plants. The air was warm, fresh, and humid. Bright lanterns hung on the walls, and from the low ceiling, piles of intriguing items cluttered the floor. Obscuring corners, a large four-post bed, curtained by even more plants, was in the far room, and in the center of the main room, on a plush leather chair, sat the fortune-teller in which Angela. I'm going to call her Angela because I think I've called her 3 different things throughout reading this, but Angela is just better. She smiled brightly. What are you doing here?" blurted out Eragon. Angela folded her hands in her lap. "Well, why don't you sit on the floor and I'll tell you. I'd offer you a chair, but I'm sitting on the only one." Questions buzzed through Eragon's mind as he settled between 2 flasks of acrid, bubbling green potions. "So," exclaimed Angela, leaning forward, "you are a rider. I suspected as much, but I didn't know for certain until yesterday. I'm sure Solenbum knew, but he never told me. I should have figured it out the moment you mentioned Brahm. Saphira, I like the name, fitting for a dragon." "Brahm's dead," said Eragon abruptly. "The Razak killed him." Angela was taken aback. She twirled a lock of her dense curls. "I'm sorry. I truly am," she said softly. Eragon smiled bitterly. "But not surprised, are you? You foretold his death, after all." "I didn't know whose death it would be," she said, shaking her head. "But no, I'm not surprised. I met Brahm once or twice. He didn't care for my frivolous attitude towards magic. It irritated him." Eragon frowned. "In term, you laughed at his fate and said that it was something of a joke. Why?" Angela's face tightened momentarily. "In retrospect, it was in rather bad taste, but I didn't know what would befall him. How do I put this? Brahm was cursed, in a way. It was his word to fail at all of his tasks except one, although through no fault of his own. He was chosen as a rider, but his dragon was killed. He loved a woman, but it was his affection that was her undoing, and that was chosen, I assume, and he was chosen, I assume, to guard and train you, but in the fact he failed at that as well. The only thing he succeeded at was killing Morzin, and a better deed he couldn't have done." "Brahm never mentioned a woman to me," retorted Eragon. Angela shrugged carelessly. "I heard it from one who couldn't have lied. But enough of this. Life goes on, and we should not trouble the dead with our worries." She scooped a pile of reeds from the floor and deftly started plaiting them together, closing the subject to discussion. Eragon hesitated, and then gave in. "All right. So why are you in Trojanheim instead of Term?" "Ah, at last an interesting question," said Angela. "After hearing Brahm's name again during your visit, I sensed the return of past Aglacia. People were whispering that the Empire was hunting a rider. I knew the Varden's dragon egg must have hatched, so I closed my shop and set out to learn more." "You knew about the egg?" "Of course I did. I'm not an idiot. I've been around much longer than you would believe. Very little happens that I don't know about." She paused and concentrated on her weaving. "Anyway, I knew I had to get to the Varden as fast as possible. I've been here for nearly a month now, though I really don't care for the place. It's far too musty for my taste, and everyone in Farthendur is so serious and noble. They're probably all doomed to tragic deaths anyway." She gave a long sigh, a mocking expression on her face. "And the dwarves are just a superstitious bunch of ninnies content to hammer rocks all their lives. The only redeeming aspect of this place is all the mushrooms and fungi that grow outside Farthendur." "Then why stay?" asked Eragon, smiling. "Because I like to be wherever important events are occurring," said Angela, cocking her head. "Besides, if I stayed in Term, Solenbum would have left without me, and I do enjoy his company. But tell me, what adventures have befallen you since we last talked?" For the next hour, Eragon summarized the experiences of the last 2.5 months. Angela listened quietly, but when he mentioned Murtog's name, she sputtered, "Murtog!" Eragon nodded. "He told me who he is, but let me finish my story before you make any judgments." He continued with his tale. When it was complete, Angela leaned back in her chair, though fully, her reeds forgotten. Without warning, Solemnbum jumped out of the hiding place and landed in her lap. He curled up, eyeing Eragon haughtily. Angela petted the werecat. Jesus. Fascinating. Galbatorix, allied with the Urgles, and Murtagh finally out in the open. I'd warn you to be careful with Murtagh, but you're obviously aware of the danger. Murtagh has been a steadfast friend and an unwavering ally, said Eragon firmly. All the same, be careful. Angela paused, then said distastefully, and there's that matter of this shade, Durza. I think he's the greatest threat to the Varden right now, aside from Galbatorix. I loathe shades. They practice the most unholy magic, after necromancy. I'd like to dig his heart out with a dull hairpin and feed it to a pig. Eragon was startled by her sudden vehemence. I don't understand. Brahm told me that shades were sorcerers who used spells to accomplish their will. But why does that make them so evil? Angela shook her head. It doesn't. Ordinary sorcerers are just like that. Ordinary. Neither better nor worse than the rest of us. They use their magical strength to control spirits and the spirits' powers. Shades, however, relinquish that control to search for greater power by allowing their bodies to be controlled by spirits. Unfortunately, only the evilest spirits seek to possess humans, and once ensconced, they never leave. Such possession can happen by accident if a sorcerer summons a spirit stronger than himself. The problem is, once the shade is created, it's terribly difficult to kill. As I'm sure you know, only 2 people, Latri the elf and Ernstad the rider, have ever survived that feat. I've heard the stories. Eragon gestured at the room. Why are you living so high up in Trojanheim? Isn't it inconvenient being this isolated? How did you get all this stuff up here? Angela threw her head back and laughed wryly. Truthfully, I'm hiding. When I first came to Trojanheim, I had a few days of peace until one of the guards who let me in Farthendur blabbed about who I was. Then all the magic users here, though barely rate the term, pestered me to join their secret group, especially those drudgy twins who control it. Finally, I threatened to turn the lot of them into toads. Excuse me, frogs. But when that didn't deter them, I sneaked up here in the middle of the night. It was less work than you might imagine, especially for one of my skills. Did you have to let the twins into your mind before you were allowed into Farthendur? Asked Eragon. I was forced to let them sift through my memories. A cold gleam leapt into Angela's eye. The twins wouldn't dare probe me, for fear of what I might do to them. Oh, they'd love to, but they know the effort would leave them broken in gibbering nonsense. I've been coming here for long before the Varden began examining people's minds. They're not about to start on me now. She peered into the other room and said, Well, this has been an enlightening talk, but I'm afraid you'll have to go now. My brew of Mandrake root in Newt's tongue is about to boil, and it needs attending. Do come back when you have the time, and please don't tell anyone I'm here. I'd hate to have to move again. It would make me very irritated. And you don't want to see me irritated. I'll keep your secret, assured Eragon, getting up. Solemnbum jumped off Angela's lap and stood. Good, she exclaimed. Eragon said farewell and left the room. Solemnbum guided him back to the dragonhold, then dismissed him with a twitch of his tail before sauntering away. Well, that was short, so we'll read Chapter 56, Hall of the Mountain King. A dwarf awaited for Eragon in the dragonhold. After bowing and muttering, Argretlam, the dwarf said with a thick accent. Good. Awake. Knurn Orek awaits you. He bowed again and scurried away. Saphira jumped out of her cave, landing next to Eragon. Zarok was in her claws. What's that for? He asked, frowning. She tilted her head. Wear it. You are a rider and should bear a rider's sword. Zarok may have a bloody history, but that should not shape your actions. Forge a new history for it. Carry it with pride. Are you sure? Remember Ajad's counsel? Saphira snorted, and a puff of smoke rose from her nostrils. Wear it, Eragon. If you wish to remain above the forces here, do not let anyone's disapproval dictate your actions. As you wish, he said reluctantly, buckling on the sword. He clambered onto her back, and Saphira flew out of Trojanheim. There was enough light in farther door now to let the hazy mass of the crater walls 5 miles away in each direction to be visible. While they spiraled down to the city mountain's base, Eragon told Saphira about his meeting with Angela. As soon as they landed by one of Trojanheim's gates, Oric ran to Saphira's side.
"My king Hrothgar wishes to see both of you. Dismount quickly. We must hurry."
Eragon trotted after the dwarf into Trojanheim. Saphira easily kept pace beside them, ignoring stares from people within the soaring corridor. Eragon asked, "Where will we meet Hrothgar?" Without slowing, Oric said,
"In the throne room beneath the city. It will be a private audience as an act of or faith. You do not need to attend him in any special manner, but speak to him respectfully. Hrothgar is quick to anger, but he is wise and sees keenly into the minds of men. So think carefully before you speak."
Once they entered Trojanheim's central chamber, Oric led those two's names. Oric led the way to one of the 2 descending staircases that flanked the opposite side of the hall. They started down the right-hand staircase, which gently curved inward until it faced the direction they had come from. The other stairway merged with theirs to form a broad cascade of dimly lit steps that ended, after 100 feet, before 2 granite doors. A 7-pointed crown was carved across both doors. 7 dwarves guarded each side of the portal. They held burnished mattocks and wore gem-encrusted belts. As Eragon, Oric, and Saphira approached, the dwarves pounded the floor with their mattock hafts. A deep boom rolled back up the stairs. The doors swung inward. A dark hallway lay before them, a good bow-shot long. The throne room was a natural cave, the walls lined with stalagmites and stalactites, each thicker than a man. Sparsely hung lanterns cast a moody light. The brown floor was smooth and polished. At the far end of the hall was a black throne with a motionless figure upon it. Oric bowed.
"The king awaits you."
Eragon put his hand on Saphira's side. The 2 of them continued forward. The doors closed behind them, leaving them alone in the dim throne room with the king. Their footsteps echoed through the halls as they advanced toward the throne. In the recesses between the stalagmites and stalactites rested large statues. Each sculpture depicted a dwarf king crowned and sitting atop a throne. Their sightless eyes gazed sternly upon the distance, their lined faces set in fierce expressions. A name was chiseled in runes beneath each set of feet. Eragon and Saphira strode solemnly between the 2 rows of long-dead monarchs. They passed more than 40 statues, then only dark and empty alcoves awaiting future kings. They stopped before Hrothgar at the end of the hall. The dwarf king himself sat like a statue upon a raised throne carved from a single piece of black marble. It was blocky, unadorned, and cut with unyielding precision. Strength emanated from the throne, strength that harkened back to ancient times when dwarves had ruled all in Iglesia, without opposition from elves or humans. A gold helm lined with rubies and diamonds rested on Hrothgar's head in place of a crown. His visage was grim, weathered, and hewn of many years' experience. Beneath a craggy brow glinted deep-set eyes, flinty and piercing. Over his powerful chest rippled a shirt of mail. His white beard was tucked under his belt, and in his lap he held a mighty warhammer with the symbol of Oric's clan embossed on its head. Eragon bowed awkwardly and knelt. Saphira remained upright. The king stirred, as if awakening from a long sleep, and rumbled.
"Rise, rider. You need not pay me tribute."
That voice, I'm sorry. Straightening, Eragon met Hrothgar's impenetrable eyes. The king inspected him with a hard gaze, then said gutturally,
"As Cornu Dum Lanok, beware the rock changes, an old dictum of ours. And nowadays the rock changes very fast indeed."
He fingered the warhammer.
I could not meet with you earlier as Ajahad did, because I was forced to deal with my enemies within the clans. They demanded that I deny you sanctuary and expel you from farthen Dur. It has taken much work on my part to convince them otherwise.
Thank you, said Eragon. I didn't anticipate how much strife my arrival would cause. The king accepted his thanks, then lifted a gnarled hand and pointed.
See there, rider, Eragon. My predecessors sit upon their graven thrones. 41 they are, and I the 42nd. When I pass from this world into the care of the gods, my Herna will be added to their ranks. The first statue is the likeness of my ancestor Korgan, who forged this mace Voland. For 8 millennia, since the dawn of our race, dwarves have ruled under Farthendur. We are the bones of the land, older in both the fair elves and savage dragons.
Saphira shifted slightly. Hrothgar leaned forward, his voice graveled and deep.
I'm old, human, even by our reckoning. Old enough to have seen all the riders in their fleeting glory. Old enough to have spoken with their first leader, Varel, who paid tribute to me within these very walls. Few are still alive who can claim that much. I remember the riders and how they meddled in our affairs. I also remember the peace they kept and made it possible to walk unharmed from Trojanheim to Narda. And now you stand before me, a lost tradition revived. Tell me, and speak truly in this, why have you come to Farthendur? I know of the events that made you flee the Empire, but what is your intent now?
For now, Saphira and I merely want to recuperate in Trojanheim, Eragon replied. We are not here to cause trouble, only to find sanctuary from the dangers we've faced for many months. Ajahad may send us the elves, but until he does, we have no wish to leave.
Then it was only the desire for safety that drove you, asked Hrothgar. Do you seek to live here and forget your troubles with the Empire?
Eragon shook his head, his pride rejecting that statement. If Ajahad told you of my past, you should know I have grievances enough to fight the Empire until it is nothing but scattered ashes. More than that, though, I want to aid those who cannot escape Galbatorix, including my cousin. I have the strength to help, so I must. The king seemed satisfied by his answer. He turned to Saphira and asked,
Dragon, what do you think in this matter? For what reason have you come?
Saphira lifted the edge of a lip to growl. Tell him that I thirst for the blood of our enemies, and eagerly await the day we ride into battle against Galbatorix. I have no love or mercy for traitors and egg-breakers like that false king. He held me over for a century, even now, still has 2 of my brethren, whom I will free if possible, and tell Hrothgar I think you ready for the task. Eragon grimaced at her words, but dutifully relayed them. The corner of Hrothgar's mouth lifted in a hint of grim amusement, deepening his wrinkles.
I see that dragons have not changed within the centuries.
He rapped the throne with a knuckle.
Do you know why the seat was quarried so flat and angular? No one would sit comfortably on it. I have not. I will relinquish it without regret when my time comes. What is there to remind you of your obligations, Eragon? If the Empire falls, will you take Galbatorix's place and claim his kingship?
I don't seek to wear the crown or rule, said Eragon, troubled. Being a rider is responsibility enough. No, I would not take the throne in Urubien. Not unless there was no one else willing or competent enough to take it. Hrothgar warned gravely.
Certainly you would be the kinder king than Galbatorix, but no race should have a leader who does not age or leave the throne. The time of the riders has passed, Eragon. They will never again rise, not even if Galbatorix's other eggs were to hatch.
A shadow crossed his face as he gazed at Eragon's side.
I see that you carry the enemy's sword. I was told of this, and that you travel with the son of the Forsworn. It does not please me to see this weapon.
He extended a hand.
I would like to examine it.
Eragon drew Zarok and presented it to the king. hilt first. Hrothgar grasped the sword and ran a practiced eye over the red blade. The edge caught the lantern light, reflecting it sharply. The dwarf king tested the point with his palm, then said, "A masterfully forged blade. Elves rarely choose to make swords. They prefer bows and spears, but when they do, the results are unmatched. This is an ill-fated blade. I am not glad to see it within my realm, but carry it if you will. Perhaps its luck has changed." He returned Zarok to Eragon and sheathed it. "Has my nephew proved helpful during your time here?" "Who?" Hrothgar raised a tangled eyebrow. "Ulrich, my youngest sister's son. He's been serving under Ajahad to show support for Varden. It seems he's been returned to my command. However, I was gratified to hear that you defended him with your words." Eragon understood that this was another sign of fate on Hrothgar's part. "I couldn't ask for a better guide." "That is good," said the king, clearly pleased. "Unfortunately, I cannot speak with you much longer. My advisors wait for me, as there are matters I must deal with. I will say this, though. If you wish the support of the dwarves within my realm, you must first prove yourself to them. We have long memories, and do not rush to hasty decisions. Words will decide nothing, only deeds." "I will keep that in mind," said Eragon, bowing again. Hrothgar nodded regally. "You may go, then." Eragon turned with Saphira, and they proceeded out of the hall of the Mountain King. Ulrich was waiting for them on the other side of the stone doors, an anxious expression on his face. He fell in with them and climbed back up to as they climbed back up to Trojanheim's main chamber. "Did it go well? Were you received favorably?" "I think so, but your king is cautious," said Eragon. "Aye, that's how he's survived this long." "I would not want Hrothgar angry at us," observed Saphira. Eragon glanced at her. "No, I wouldn't either. I'm not sure what he thought of you. He seems to disapprove of dragons, though he didn't say it outright." That seemed to amuse Saphira, in that he is wise, especially since he's barely knee-high to me. In Trojanheim's center, under the sparkling Izadar Mithram, Ulrich said, "Your blessing yesterday stirred up the Varden like an overturned beehive. The child Severit's touched has been hailed as a future hero. She and her guardian have been crawled in the finest rooms. Everyone's talking about your miracle. All the human mothers seem intent on finding you to get the same for their children." Alarmed, Eragon furtively looked around. "What should we do?" "Aside from taking back your actions," asked Eragon dryly, "stay out of sight as much as possible. Everyone will be kept out of the Dragonhold, so you won't be disturbed there." Eragon did not want to return to the Dragonhold yet. It was early in the day, and he wanted to explore Trojanheim with Saphira. Now that they were out of the Empire, there was no reason for them to be apart. But he wanted to avoid attention, which would be impossible with her at his side. "Saphira, what do you want to do?" She nosed him, scales brushing his arms. "I'll return to the Dragonhold. There's someone there I want to meet. Wander around as much as you like." "All right," he said. "But who do you want to meet?" Saphira only winked a large eye at him before padding down one of Trojanheim's 4 main tunnels. Eragon explained to Ulrich where she was going, then said, "I'd like some breakfast. And then I'd like to see some more of Trojanheim. It's such an incredible place. I don't want to go to the training grounds until tomorrow, as I'm still not fully recovered." Ulrich nodded, his beard bobbing on his chest. "In that case, would you like to visit Trojanheim?" "In that case, would you like to visit Trojanheim's library? It's quite old and contains many scrolls of great value. You might find it interesting to read the history of a Galacia that hasn't been tainted by Galbatorix's hand." With a pang, Eragon remembered how Brahm had taught him to read. He wondered if he still had this skill. A long time had passed since he'd written any words. "Yes, let's do that." "Very well." After they ate, Ulrich guided Eragon through a myriad of corridors to their destination. When they reached the library's carved arch, Eragon stepped through it reverently. The room behind him a forest. The room reminded him of a forest. Rows of graceful colonnades branched up to a dark, ribbed ceiling 5 stories above. Between the pillars, black marble bookcases stood back to back. Racks of scrolls covered the walls, interspread with narrow walkways reaching the twisting staircase. Placed at regular intervals around the walls were pairs of facing stone benches. Between them were small tables whose bases flowed seamlessly into the floor. Let me just see how much longer we have here. Okay. Countless books and scrolls were stored in the room.
"This is the true legacy of our race," said Oric. "Here resides the writings of our greatest king and scholars, from antiquity to present. Also recorded are songs and stories comprised of our artisans. This library may be our most precious possession. It isn't all of our work, though. There are human writings here as well. Yours is a short-lived but prolific race. We have little or nothing of the elves. They guard their secrets jealously."
"How long may I stay?" asked Eragon, moving towards the shelves.
"As long as you want. Come to me if you have any questions."
Eragon browsed through the volumes with delight, reaching eagerly for those with interesting titles or covers. Surprisingly, dwarves use the same runes to write as humans. He was somewhat disheartened by how hard reading was after months of neglect. He skipped from book to book, slowly working his way deep into the vast library. Eventually, he became immersed in the translation of poems by Dondar, the 10th dwarf king. As he scanned the graceful lines, unfamiliar footsteps approached from behind the bookcase. The sound startled him, but he berated himself for being silly. He could not be the only person in the library. Even so, he quietly replaced the book and slipped away, senses alert for danger. He had been ambushed too many times to ignore such feelings. He heard the footsteps again, only now there were two sets of him. Apprehensive, he darted across an opening, trying to remember exactly where Oric was sitting. He sidestepped around the corner and stared as he found himself face to face with the twins. The twins stood together, their shoulders meeting, a blank expression on their smooth faces. Their black snake eyes bore into him. Their hands, hidden within the folds of their purple robes, twitched slightly. They both bowed, but the movement was insolent and derisive.
"We have been searching for you,"
said one. His voice was uncomfortably like the Razak's. Eragon suppressed a shiver. "What for?" He reached out with his mind and contacted Saphira. She immediately joined thoughts with him.
"Ever since you met with Ajahad, we've wanted to apologize for our actions."
The words were mocking, but not in a way Eragon could challenge.
"We have come to pay you homage."
Eragon flushed angrily as they bowed again. "Careful," warned Saphira. He pushed back his rising temper. He could not afford to be riled by this confrontation. An idea came to him, and he said with a small smile, "Nay, it is I who pay homage to you. Without your approval, I could never have gained entrance into Farthendur." He bowed to them in return, making the movement as insulting as he could. There was a flicker of irritation in the twins' eyes, but they smiled and said, "We are honored that one so important as yourself thinks so highly of us. We are in your debt for your kind words." Now it was Eragon's turn to be irritated. "I will remember that when I'm needed." Saphira intruded sharply in his thoughts. "You're overdoing it. Don't say anything you'll regret. They will remember every word they can use against you."
"This is difficult enough without you making comments,"
he snapped. She subsided with an exasperated grumble. The twins moved closer, the helms of their robes brushing softly over the floor. Their voices became more pleasant. "We have searched for you for another reason, though, Ryder. The few magic users who live in Trojanheim have formed a group. We call ourselves Duvengrgrada, or the Wandering Path." "I know," interrupted Eragon, remembering what Angela had said about it. "Your knowledge of the ancient language is impressive," said the twins smoothly. "As we were saying, Duvengrgrada has heard of your mighty feats, and we have come to extend an invitation of membership. We would be honored to have one of your statue as a member, as I suspect we might be able to assist you as well." "How?" The other twin said. "The two of us have garnered much experience in magical matters. We could guide you, show you spells we've discovered, and teach you words of power. Nothing would gladden us more if we could assist in some small way your path to glory. No repayment would be necessary, though if you saw fit to share some scraps of your knowledge, we would be satisfied. Eragon's face hardened as he realized what they were asking for.
Do you think I'm a half-wit? He demanded harshly. I won't apprentice myself to you so you can learn the words Brahm taught me. It must have angered you when you couldn't steal them from my mind.
The twins abruptly dropped their facade of smiles.
We are not to be trifled with, boy. We are the ones who will test your abilities with magic. And that could be most unpleasant. Remember, it only takes one misconceived spell to kill someone. You may be a rider, but the two of us are still stronger than you.
Eragon kept his face expressionless, even though his stomach nodded painfully. I will consider your offer, but it may.
Then we will expect your answer tomorrow. Make sure it is the right one.
They smiled coldly and stalked deeper into the library. Eragon scowled. I'm not going to join the Duvarngrada, no matter what they do. You should talk to Angela, said Saphira. She's dealt with the twins before. Perhaps she could be there when they tested you. That might prevent them from harassing you. That's a good idea. Eragon wound through the bookcases until he'd found Oryx sitting on a bench, busily polishing his war axe. I'd like to return to the Dragonhold. The dwarf slid a haft of the axe through the leather loop in his belt, then escorted Eragon to the gate where Saphira waited. People had already gathered around her. Ignoring them, Eragon scrambled onto Saphira's back, and they escaped into the sky. This problem must be resolved quickly. You cannot let the twins intimidate you, Saphira said as she landed on Izadar Mithram. I know, but I hope we can avoid angering them. They could be dangerous enemies. He dismounted quickly, keeping a hand on Zarok. So can you? Do you want them as allies? He shook his head. Not really. I'll tell them tomorrow that I don't want to join Duvarngrada. Eragon left Saphira in her cave and wandered out of the Dragonhold. He wanted to see Angela, but he didn't remember how to find her hiding place, and Sullivum was not there to guide him. He roamed in the deserted corridors, hoping to meet Angela by chance. When he grew tired of staring at empty rooms and endless gray walls, he retraced his footsteps to the hold. As he neared it, he heard someone speaking within the room. He halted and listened, but the clear voice fell silent. Saphira? Who's in there? A female. She has an air of command. I'll distract her while you come in. Eragon loosened Zarok in his sheath. Oryx said that intruders would be kept out of the Dragonhold. Who could this be? He steadied his nerves, then stepped into the hold, his hand on his sword. A young woman stood in the center of the room, looking curiously at Saphira, who had struck her head out of the cave. The woman appeared to be about 70 years old. The star sapphire cast a rosy light on her, actuating skin the same deep shade as Ajahad's. Her velvet dress was wine red and elegantly cut. A jeweled dagger, worn with use, hung from her waist in a tooled leather sheath. Eragon crossed his arms, waiting for the woman to notice him. She continued to look at Saphira, then curtsied and asked sweetly, Please, could you tell me where Rider Eragon is? Saphira's eyes sparkled with amusement. A small smile. Eragon said, I am here. The woman whirled to face him, hand flying to her dagger, her face striking, with almond-shaped eyes, wide lips, and round cheekbones. She relaxed and curtsied again. I am Nisada, she said. Eragon inclined his head. You obviously know who I am, but what do you want? Nisada smiled charmingly. My father, Ajahad, sent me here with a message. Would you like to hear it? The Varden's leader had not struck Eragon as one inclined to marriage and fatherhood. He wondered who Nisada's mother was. She must have been an uncommon woman to have attracted Ajahad's eye. Yes, I would. Nisada tossed her hair back and recited, He is pleased that you are doing well, but he cautions you against actions like your benediction yesterday. They create more problems than they solve. Also, he urges you to proceed with testing as soon as possible. He needs to know how capable you are before he communicates with the elves. Did you climb all the way up here just to tell me that? Eragon asked, thinking of Volturin's length. Nisada shook her head. I use the pulley system that transports goods to the upper levels. We could have sent the message with signals, but I decided to bring it myself and meet you in person. Would you like to sit down? Eragon asked. He motioned to Severa's cave. Nisada laughed lightly. No, I am expected elsewhere. You should also know my father decreed that you visit Murtagh, if you wish. A somber expression disturbed her previously smooth features. Hold on. All right. Where am I here? Okay. I met Murtagh earlier. He's anxious to speak with you. He seemed lonely. You should visit him. She gave Eragon directions to Murtagh's cell. Eragon thanked her for the news, then asked, What about Araya? Is she better? Can I see her? Orc hasn't been able to tell me much. She smiled mischievously. Araya is recovering swiftly, as all elves do. No one is allowed to see her except my father, Hrothgar, and the healers. They have spent much time with her, learning all that occurred during her imprisonment. She swept her eyes over Severa. I must go now. Is there anything you would have me convey to Ajahad on your behalf? No, except a desire to visit Araya, and give him my thanks for the hospitality he's shown us. I will take your words directly to him. Farewell, Rider Eragon. I hope we shall soon meet again. She curtsied and exited the dragonhold, head held high. If she really came all the way up Trojanheim just to meet me, pulleys or no pulleys. There was more to this meeting than idle chatter, remarked Eragon. Aye, said Saphira, withdrawing her head into the cave. Eragon climbed up to her and was surprised to see Solumbum curled up in the hollow at the base of her neck. The werecat was purring deeply. His black-tipped tail flicked back and forth. The two of them looked at Eragon impudently, as if to ask, What? Eragon shook his head, laughing helplessly. Saphira, is Solumbum who you wanted to meet? They both blinked at him and answered, Yes. Just wondering, he said, mirth still bubbling within him. It made sense that they would befriend each other. Their personalities were similar. They were both creatures of magic. He sighed, realizing some of the day's tension he had unbuckled as he unbuckled Zarok. Solumbum, do you know where Angela is? I couldn't find her and I need her advice. Solumbum kneaded his paws against Saphira's scaled back. She is somewhere in Trojanheim. When will she return? Soon. How soon? He asked impatiently. I need to talk to her today. Not that soon. The werecat refused to say more despite Eragon's persistent questions. He gave up and nestled against Saphira. Solumbum's purring was a low thrum above his head. I have to visit Murtagh tomorrow, he thought, fingering Brahm's ring. Chapter, what is it now, 57? Araya's Test. And that is the end of that. And I'll read the rest at a later date.